It's Orthodox Christian Theology. It's Craig Truly, and with me today is the other Paul. How we doing, Paul?
What up, Craig? I am doing very nice. It's a very beautiful, chill Australian morning. Got my tea, got my croissant. I'm ready to go to test your Popesplaining ability.
Well, today we're doing Popesplaining, and we are going, well, not we, you in the audience are going to test me. I'm going to use the utmost charity, nuance, and of course, sophistry to defend the papacy. And I will do so with the utmost sincerity and being sophistic. And if I can make you go, man, maybe the papacy is true, then you'll know that I know their stuff. And that's the whole point of this show, is to have fun. So, guys, below is a call-in line in the info bar. Call the number. I don't have it memorized. So if you're too lazy to click the info bar, well, that's on you. You had your opportunity to talk to the other Paul halfway across. They're in the future. They got flying cars.
Real.
So one day in the future. So this is your opportunity. Also, write your questions here, like hello, Mr. Jawline. You can write your questions in the chat box, and we will address them. And so, being that's the case, Paul, lean on me, man. I'm ready. I'm ready to defend the papacy.
Excellent.
Give me your best shot. Give me your best shot, but I am not going to go easy on you.
Oh no, I wouldn't expect that.
I'm not going to go easy on you.
Mutual
respect.
The
fun is I'm going to go hard. I'm going to go papist hard on this.
Okay. And that's the beauty of mutual respect. You don't go easy on someone. If you go easy on someone, that means you think that they're beneath you. But really quickly, to translate for people below the age of 30, a call-in line is when you use your phone to call into a show. So it's not through Zoom or through the fancy internet interwebs thingomadoodads. You got to actually pick up your phone, and it's not just for Instagram, believe it or not, and TikTok. So yes, translation over for under 30s. Now let's get right into it. Okay.
Well, lay it on me. I'm ready,
Mr. Truglia. Okay?
Yeah.
I'll start off with, well, what I do fundamentally think are true points, but relatively speaking, compared to other objections, a softball. It is said by the papal proponents that Peter receives himself alone the keys of the kingdom in Matthew chapter 16. To you, I'll give the keys of the kingdom, says Jesus to Peter. And whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And it is on this basis that Jesus, speaking specifically to Peter, what is my stuttering today? Specifically to Peter, and it is in regards to the universal church, that upon this rock I will build my church, simpliciter, not one congregation, the whole world. Now, because of that, it is said, he has therefore received the supreme office, and thus his successors in the city of Rome are supreme over the whole Christian church. But
obviously, that's the clear interpretation, Matthew 16:18. Get out with it.
Allegedly, extremely clear. But, Mr. Truly, have you ever read a passage known as Matthew chapter 18?
Well, of course I've read Matthew chapter 18, but I know where you're going.
Really?
I'm gonna knock you out with this one. Keep going.
Really have you now? Really have you read Matthew chapter 18? Because it is said there to the other apostles that Jesus says to them, you, plural in the Greek, whatsoever you, plural, the other apostles shall bind on earth, shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Clearly, given that the keys are defined as the powers to bind and loose, it is thus clear that all of the apostles have this supremacy over the faith. They sit, as Jesus says elsewhere, on 12 thrones each, judging the tribes of Israel. So therefore, clearly, Peter is not supreme over the other apostles like a papal.
All right. I'm gonna get you now. There's two therefores here. First, he said, because keys bind and loose, therefore bind and loose in Matthew chapter 18 is also reference to key. And two, then he say, well, therefore, because that's true, that means the other apostles have the same authority as Peter. But here's where you're wrong. Matthew 16:18 only names Peter. It only names the keys about Peter. And you can't have that anyone else other than the Lord himself in the book of Revelation. And so you could all you want say, well, the other stuff is the same as the keys. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter, because those word keys is only Matthew 16. And it's only about Peter. And you can't explain that away.
Now, Mr. Trulia, that sounds a little bit like a just so story, like a very ad hoc explanation that just because the mere word keys are not used, that therefore Peter is special. But how are the keys not defined as the power to bind and loose? What else could the keys be, Mr. Trulia? Please explain.
Key pertains to authority, because in the book of Revelation, the Lord Jesus Christ has the keys to heaven, right? To life and to death. He has the keys. So it pertains to authority. So yes, other bishops, other apostles could bind and loose sins. Priests could bind and loose sins, but they lack authority. They get their authority. Their basis is in Peter alone, who is the origin of the whole episcopate. And the whole episcopate has no power unless in communion with Peter. So those keys are the symbol of the authority that is only in Peter and his successors.
Done, Mr. Truglia. Wow, this is why I gave you the softball. That is truly, now that you've told me, that is very manifestly clear in the text. Everything you've said there, every single element of distinguishing the authority from the power to bind and loose, and how Peter is the origin of the other apostles' authority, that is so manifestly clear in the text. I can't believe I didn't see that before. Unbelievable.
Well,
to my next objection.
It's pretty obvious, though. It says keys, Peter. The word keys not used in any other context. You just got to make stuff up to make it used in any other context.
Okay. Now for my next Metropolitan Paulopolis. Real. Once I establish mainstream.
And guys, if you want to interrupt Paul, you call in the call-in line. We'll plug you right in, because this is not a fancy operation where we got people waiting. I plug you right in. Paul's got to be quiet. So call in line below. Paul, let's go.
That's true. Okay, now here's my next objection. One from church history, of course, because as the Roman
only
community
thing that
says,
matters to us is church history. That and Newman.
Well, I hope that this matters to you, because this is a very early event pertaining to the entire church. There is an event known as the Easter controversy, or if you're a big brain academic like me, the Quartodeciman controversy. In that controversy, there was questions raised about when to celebrate Easter for the Christians, whether after the first Sunday after the initial vernal equinox in the year, or whether to celebrate it on the 14th of the month of Nisan in the Jewish calendar. Now, the entire church, including Rome, including the three traditionally major sees, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch, all affirmed the vernal equinox date. Everybody except Asia Minor, and that region being within Turkey, they held to the date of the 14th of Nisan. Now,
they're heretics.
Now, you would clearly say that, you dirty Romanist. But here's what happened. Because they dared to celebrate on a different day, the Roman Church attempted to threaten them into celebrating on the same date as everybody else. Now, rather than simply fall right in line with my big bad daddy Pope, as is expected on the papal hypothesis, instead, the Bishop Polycrates of Ephesus, who represented the Synod of Asia Minor, he wrote back to Victor and his other presbyters there, because he uses the plural brothers in the letter, as preserved by Eusebius. He says that he is not persuaded by their threats, and that from his study of Holy Scripture and his interaction with the holy tradition around him, he is more confident to stick with that tradition of his forefathers in Asia Minor, and he takes from the example of the apostles against Victor in saying, we must serve God rather than man. Now, to say that to a pope makes absolutely zero sense, because the pope himself is the vicar of Christ on earth. And so to say that you would rather obey Christ or obey God over the pope on an issue where there is the backing of the universal consensus of the church, everybody except Asia Minor, and on a matter of universal liturgy, which is well within the papal prerogatives according to Roman ecclesiology. For Polycrates to say that, it's a clear demonstration that he and Asia Minor did not affirm the papacy at all. And even further, Eusebius himself records that the other bishops around the world admonished Victor for trying to break up unity in this way. Now, certain papal apologists will respond, but those other bishops didn't deny Victor had the authority to do so. One, only two such letters are even partially preserved from this issue. And one of them, Polycrates, as I mentioned, does deny that he has such an authority. But the other one from Irenaeus, which is also partially preserved by Eusebius, talks about how it is better for Victor rather than doing this manner of course, even though he agrees with Victor Irenaeus on the issue of when to celebrate Easter. He instead says that the better course is to preserve Christian unity amidst the diversity of liturgy. Now, hang on a second. According to Rome, the principle of unity himself is the Pope. It makes absolutely no sense to say that the Pope is breaking unity. It is those who are defying his orders, like Asia Minor, who are breaking unity. So, Mr. Trulli, in light of all this converging evidence, how do you explain the papal hypothesis? Please.
Well, it's very clear. This is one of those examples where someone says, well, how could papacy not be true when they're watching the papacy happen? They're watching Pope Victor excommunicating from the church, the Ephesian church. How could they do that unless there was some idea of the papacy? No one wrote to them that they were crazy or that they couldn't. They said they shouldn't. Not couldn't, shouldn't. So obviously he could. That universal jurisdiction, that direct jurisdiction was well understood. Now, I think it helps to rewind a few decades, St. Ignatius' letter to the Romans. Because St. Ignatius, when he writes the Romans, says that the Church of Rome presides over the love feast, the agape. The whole people of God is the love feast, the euphemism in that. And so it was well understood that the Bishop of Rome was the spiritual head of the whole church, the principle of unity for that whole church. So then when you take heretics like the Ephesians that are worshiping on the wrong day of Easter and go, oh, well, the heretics don't recognize the right jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome. What St. Ignatius, not St. Polycrates because he's not a saint, but St. Ignatius understood that the Church of Rome is the head of the love feast. But we're going to take the words of heretics that they weren't. And so while I personally feel that St. Irenaeus had the right way of going at it, a little more pastoral, a little let's meet people halfway and bring them all online. And I think St. Irenaeus was being wise. What none of them were doing were rejecting the papacy. Because St. Irenaeus even says that to Rome belongs, and I'm trying to remember the words in the English translation, but to Rome belongs the preeminence in the church. So how could the same St. Irenaeus that's saying to Rome belongs to preeminence is going to mean that somehow the spiritual authority, the head of the love feast, like St. Ignatius says, that just doesn't exist? And I just named 2 second-century sources from saints. You named some heretic named Polycrates. What it comes down to it is even this. Let's just concede that some churches legitimately disagreed ecclesiastically with Rome. It shows as early as the 2nd century that Rome had one authentic apostolic tradition, and the other churches had an authentic early tradition. Maybe not apostolic. It looks like a corruption, considering what we talked about Matthew 16:18. But at the very least, it shows that this is the inheritance of the Roman Church, a legitimate early inheritance. How do you explain Papist ecclesiology in the 2nd century explicitly coming out of the mouth of Pope Saint Victor, right? Another saint, comparing a saint to Polycrates. So there's just too many holes in what you're bringing forward. What it comes down to very plainly, to sum it up for the audience, is that Pope Victor excommunicated the Ephesian church because it was in his authority to do so. And no one could stop him from it. They could just tell him it's not the right thing to do. The pastoral thing to do is not to do this. So this is smoking gun proof that papist ecclesiology existed in the 2nd century.
Now, Mr. Trulli, I find it pretty funny how you say, oh, I'm just appealing to a heretic called Polycrates. Let's take a step back here. Why is Polycrates a heretic? Because why is the papacy true? Because these fathers affirm it. But not Polycrates, a major church figure representing an entire council.
Figure is not a church father. He's not a saint.
But Polycrates is not a church father. He doesn't get, why isn't he a church father? Because he's a heretic. Why is he a heretic?
Because he's a heretic.
Because he defied Rome. Of course. The very beautiful self-enclosed.
Well, no, and there's a canon of Nicaea about the court of the Simeons. So the whole church knows that he's a heretic.
But here's the other issue, though. Why did so many other bishops defend Asia Minor's practice and assume, and not assume, but assert
they didn't defend their practice. They rejected their dating for Easter.
Why does it make any sense in the papal hypothesis to say that Victor ought to pursue unity if it is the heretics ipso facto causing disunity? That doesn't make sense on the claim of the principle of unity being the Pope himself. Please explain that.
Well, again, just because people did the wrong thing in opposing the Pope, that doesn't make their wrong date for Easter correct. And also, like I said, it still shows, and you can't explain how else there's papist ecclesiology in the 2nd century. It shows it's early, apostolic, and authentic. Also, what it comes down to it is people were trying to cut the Pope down to size. And quite frankly, it was out of condescension. He just didn't excommunicate all of them, because clearly that's what they deserved. He should have ordained new bishops for all these cities, for Alexandria, for Lyon, because they should not be opposing the principle of unity. But it's because he wanted peace in the churches that he tolerated this uppity behavior.
I think it's just seriously not getting through. The fact that they juxtapose unity with Victor's action, these many other bishops, including Saint Irenaeus himself, clearly shows they don't believe.
Who again said that Rome had the preeminence, so he's the wrong guy to quote.
We also talk about as well Ignatius. What does Ignatius say? You talk about him presiding over the
love feast. That's what he says about the Church of Rome.
Of God. Let's see what Ignatius himself says. Ignatios hokai theophoros tele. Oh wait, sorry, don't speak Greek. Oh, whoopsie. Sorry, Papist, my friend who doesn't speak Greek. Ignatius, the image bearer to the church that has found mercy in the majesty of the Father Most High and Jesus Christ, his only Son, the church beloved and enlightened through the will of the one who willed all things that exist, in accordance with faith in love and love of Jesus Christ our God, which also presides in the place of the district of the Romans, worthy of God, worthy of honor, worthy of blessing, worthy of praise, worthy of success, so on and so forth. I also greet in the name of Jesus Christ and the Father to those who are united in the flesh, and spirit to every commandment, so on and so forth. Where does he say presiding in love? Where does he say that? Is that chapter 1 or chapter 2?
I think it's chapter 1. I'm going by memory.
Either way, he says presiding in love at some point. But notice this. Notice the context behind that. In the prologue, they preside in the place of the district of the Romans. Interesting. So what are they actually presiding over? The place of the district of the Romans, whether the city of Rome itself.
I'm going to pop this non-contextual argument open, because Saint Ignatius, who's the Patriarch of Antioch, right, a Petrine See, he's the Patriarch of Antioch. Who's he say is the bishop in his absence? He actually says the bishop in his absence is the whole Roman Church. Right? So presiding over love isn't like, oh, they're presiding with some sort of love in Rome. They're talking about the entire love feast, the whole Christian church. And then he even applies it to the Church of Antioch, which is a whole other patriarchate, which again shows direct jurisdiction of a whole other patriarchate in an early 2nd century source.
So, to you, according to you, presiding over love, that's very literally what the Greek says. Presiding over love means having the direct and immediate jurisdiction over all ecclesial matters with respect to other churches around the entire world. That's what you believe that presiding over love means.
Absolutely. And it also shows that the principle of unity, because presiding over love is a reference to the Eucharist, to the sacrament. And so they preside over the whole sacrament of the church, the whole Eucharist of the church, the whole love feast. It's incredibly strong papalist language.
That sounds very, very... very loaded. Lots of language, lots of ideas, lots of concepts.
Let me ask you this. Explain what it means to preside over the love feast, and that the Roman Synod in Ignatius' absence is going to preside over his see. What else could that mean? Explain how both those things make sense.
All it says, it doesn't say preside over the love feast. Now, agape, in context, it could refer to the love feast, but it also could simply refer to the concept itself, divine love. And so,
what's the name of the love feast? By the way,
there is no instance
in the book of Jude. What's the name of love feast in the Greek? Isn't that agape?
Thais agapais. That's right. To the love.
All right. Okay. They mean different things. Nice shot, but it doesn't work.
Yes,
the point is, and then how could Ignatius have jurisdiction? How could Rome have jurisdiction over Antioch? If they don't have direct jurisdiction, then how do they have jurisdiction over Antioch?
He says that his people will have Jesus Christ as their bishop, not the Bishop of Rome. Where does he say that?
It says both. It says both. Clearly. You're going to make me look it up?
Well, I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind you actually looking it up.
Oh, see, look, you're facing the papal robot here that doesn't even really believe it, and I got you on the ropes.
Oh, excuse me. Got me on the ropes.
You're not quoting the
I'm sorry,
sources
who's the one
right.
asking you to actually prove your assertions and your 12 billion definitions that you put into one word?
No, it's just not good entertainment if you're making me look something up while I'm doing this. I think people should call you up and say, hey, that's a little too much you're doing right here.
I don't know, man. Sounds like a lot of copamine to me.
I don't think it sounds like copamine. You're gonna make me open up my notes. Look, you go to the next topic before I slap you down on this one.
Okay, next topic. I actually hadn't thought about it. I thought about those two.
Because that's all you got. Because
Is anyone calling in? Is anyone calling in yet?
Apparently not. I'm not hearing little ringing sounds.
Unbelievable.
The calling number's here. It's in the info bar. They just don't want their voices because they know they're not going to sound very masculine on the phone. I'm going to smack them down. I'm going to tell them get off my phone. They're afraid of that.
People call in. You throw in something about Francis or something. I don't know.
Well, someone said, if papacy real, why Francis? It's because we've had good and bad popes, but he's never done anything ex cathedra that's problematic. So the integrity of the papacy is maintained. So it's really not a big deal. I don't know why people bring it up. They could bring clowns and pachamamas all day. It doesn't affect that none of this is... That's all disciplinary. It could be fallible. Disciplinary things are changed all the time. So I don't see why it's a big deal.
Yeah, clearly. We could say it's imprudential, but it's still just disciplinary. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, here's another one. The case of Pope Honorius. Are you familiar with that, Mr. Craig?
Absolutely. I'm very familiar with Pope Honorius.
Okay. Then please explain for me this. The Sixth Ecumenical Council actually anathematized Honorius for teaching the monothelite heresy, literally one-willism. Now, how can that make sense in the Vatican I world where nobody shall judge the first see? Or rather, more specifically, the first see shall be judged by no one. And additionally, the claim that, as common belief and even affirmed by the papacy today, that the papacy cannot, in its official office as universal shepherd, preach heresy. And yet, here we have the Sixth Ecumenical Council saying, quote, the author of evil, having found suitable instruments for working out his will, we mean Theodorus, who was Bishop of Paran, Sergius, Pyrrhus, Paul, and Peter, who were archbishops of this royal city, and moreover Honorius, who was Pope of the Elder Rome, has actively employed them, that is Satan, has actively employed them in raising up for the whole church the stumbling blocks of one will and one operation, disseminating in novel terms among the Orthodox people a heresy. Now, how do you explain that? The Sixth Council is very clearly impugning Honorius with teaching the whole church the one will heresy. Please explain.
Because by teaching, we know historically from other sources, he wasn't the one who made the ekthesis. Okay? And so they're saying he was teaching it because he was supporting them. And that's when Rome assented to the Council of Constantinople III. When they assented, they said that essentially that he supported these heretics because he didn't promulgate the ekthesis, which was the conciliar document. He wrote a private letter to the Bishop of Constantinople using the term. And then the ekthesis quotes it out of context because we even know from saints like Maximus that maybe he was getting at something else. But even conceding that there's no error in fact, because councils can make errors in facts, they just don't make errors in doctrine. So even if there was an error in fact in the Council of Constantinople III, which you can't prove there wasn't because there's good debate to be had that that Honorius actually meant something orthodox by what he said, the reality is that he did not promulgate to the whole church because we actually know what letters he wrote it in. He wrote it in private correspondence to the Bishop of Constantinople. And so what we're seeing there is bluster and exaggeration in the Mensa Constantinople, perhaps even, like I said, an error in fact, a historical error, because it's not that we lack the letter. We know exactly who he addressed it to. It was not an ex-cathedra statement.
Now, I recognize that distinction that the papers do love to bring up. Distinction in councils of infallibility on their dogmatic claims, but not on their claims of historical fact. That can be a valid distinction at certain points. Here's the problem, though. In this,
it's a logically necessary distinction.
This fact, this error of historical fact, this alleged error, for one, this is an entire council promoting this. So according to you, we have to say that the consensus of the council fathers on the historical fact was that this was taught universally. And yet here you are, my Roman friend, bringing your private judgment, which you impugn us for using, in order to say, no, all the council fathers were wrong. This wasn't taught to the whole world by Honorius. This was just in a private letter. They took it out of context. Who are you to raise your private judgment over the consensus?
It's just basic. It's just a basic study of history. We don't stop studying history, and just because we have an infallible means to discern doctrine, that we have a visible principle of unity in the Pope, that does not mean that interpretation is magically fixed. See, I'm not one of those low IQ papists that think that actually fixes everything. That's not the point. The point is that it's true because it is true that the papacy really is that principle of unity. The papacy really is infallible. The papacy really does have direct jurisdiction. We expound this because it's true. Of course, we need to use interpretation of the fathers, interpretation of the scriptures, interpretation of history. All these things are relevant, even interpretation of logic, because there's doctrinal development. So it doesn't remove interpretation. It also doesn't remove the fact that interpretation could be wrong. So that's not my point. We need the grace of God to interpret these things correctly. See, I'm a good Augustinian pro-papist. So to me, I can just avoid the whole quagmire of saying, oh, well, you're using interpretation, because using personal interpretation is not a problem. It's inescapable. But that does not mean that the papacy is not historically true, not biblically necessary, and the most logically coherent understanding of the Christian faith and its epistemology. Now, that being said, I know you want to jump back, and we got these two papists call themselves papists. You know, that's my word. When we call ourselves the P word, that's okay. It's when you say it that's the problem.
That's true. That's true.
You know, what's going on, my papists? No big deal between the papists. All right, it's when you say it that it's a problem. Now we got some questions here, and it says, I want to take some audience questions. The call-in line is open. Phone number's below if you want me to make fun of your voice.
George, if you look in the chat, I was going to respond more, but George says he's trying to call, but it says you weren't available after it rang for a bit.
Oh, wait, it's calling. It's happening. You ready?
It's happening.
It's happening.
Call from
George, why are you claiming...
Press 1.
Press 1. I got to figure out how to do that now. 1 second. Hey, George, why are you claiming that you can't get in? That's a lie. You're obviously in right now.
Well, I guess third time was a charm.
Third time's charm. All right, lay it on me. Now this is your opportunity to prove the papists wrong. Just you don't use that word.
All right. Well, it was pretty funny, actually.
Can you put him... Sorry, George. Can you put him closer to the mic because we can't hear him?
Answers before, because I used to hate listening to them. Well, hate's a strong word, but I used to, I don't know, just listen to them for my own amusement, and I eventually called in. So I put more thought into it at the time I called, so I don't know if I'll give the same verbiage, but it kind of went along these lines. So if both the Catholic and the Orthodox view the unified church of the first millennium as a measuring stick whereby we can see whether or not, we're in the wrong or they're in the wrong, that behavior, why can't we use the schism itself as a data point against the papacy? Because right before the schism, you had the unified church, and they all decided to not recognize the validity of whatever Rome was trying to do at the time. They viewed it as worth separation.
All right, so if I understand your question right, it's, well, are you trying to assert that the schism invalidates the papacy because the schism is bad fruits of the papal ecclesiastical system?
No, what I'm saying is we look at the unified church and its behavior towards the papacy as, did they treat it as having this supreme power and authority, or did they view it as just another patriarch who was looked at as another patriarch? So things like the Sixth Council and Pope Honorius and things like that. We take all these data points and we discuss things way earlier because it seems that has most gusto. But why not look at the schism itself, where every patriarchate deliberated, and if this was a common, the papacy was supreme, and that was kind of a ubiquitous knowledge throughout all of the Church Catholic. Like, why would the schism be something that even happened?
All right. So let me sum up your question. You're saying
Craig definitely can't answer this.
all right. If you're saying and just so there's no echo, other Paul, just keep quiet for a second. So your question is, if the papal ecclesiology was ubiquitous, how could the schism happen? Because they should have recognized that. Is that your question, George? Because then I'll have to hang up the phone.
Right, because he was viewed as separatable. People had no problem separating themselves from the papacy. So it was almost like the whole mind of the rest of the church. They must have flipped the switch and said, okay, this thing, we're just going to change our minds on it, the same page, and remain in communion. But
all right. Well, thank you for your question. I'm going to have to hang up, and I'll address your question. Thank you so much. We got other people also trying to get on. Now, that being said, it's very simple, me giving the papist standpoint, which is because of sin, right? The pre-schism church, Formula Hermistus, Constantinople 869, 870, we have Archbishop Leo being called the bishop of the world. We have all these examples of the pre-schism church accepting papalism, and you go, well, why this change in the 11th century? Because the rest of the church changed, right? You had St. Theodore the Studite talking about the Bishop of Rome being the final arbiter in matters. Why weren't they talking that way in the 11th century? Because of sin, right? And so, to me, this is proof that it wasn't the Roman Catholic Church that changed, it was the rest of the church that changed. If you want the geopolitical reasons, well, quite frankly, if I remember right, it was the Macedonian dynasty that was in power at that time in Constantinople. They were at one of the zeniths of Byzantine power. They retook Antioch. They were retaking the Balkans. They were keeping any Viking incursions away. They were keeping Slavic incursions away. They reconquered Bulgaria, and they got rid of the Patriarchate of Bulgaria because they reconquered Bulgaria. They retook Antioch, and they reincorporated Antioch into the Byzantine Empire after centuries of not being in the Byzantine Empire. So clearly what was developing in the Byzantine Empire was a Constantinopolitan and Caesaro-Papist primacy over against the historical ecclesiology of the church, which has always been papalist. All right, so that's the answer to that question. Now, we could take other call-ins. I'm going to answer. Now that I figure out how the microphones work, future call-ins will sound a little better. We have this question: how can the Vicar of Christ / Alter Christus be so influenced by progressive culture? Because again, it's only ex cathedra statements in which he's infallible. Popes can make all sorts of mistakes otherwise. So that's really a non-issue. Could a pope make errors? Of course he can. Could he have Pachamama's clown masses, bad statues behind him? Yes, they could have all sorts of bad things, but that's not what papal infallibility is. That's not what Vatican I teaches, so it's utterly irrelevant for our purposes. Now, we have Zane, who asked the question, Catholic Craig, have you addressed the Meletian Schism and St. Meletius presiding over First Constantinople? We haven't addressed this, but I'll just say shortly that the Roman Church did not accept First Constantinople, and the Roman Church did not accept that St. Asclepius was their legate on their behalf, and they needed their own councils to receive it. So that would be my response. We got another call-in, 1 second, from an unknown.
Anon moment. Oh, Craig, you're muted. Craig, you're muted, bruh. Yeah, you're muted. You're muted.
Muted myself in the excitement. All right. Oh, what are you going to do?
Gentlemen, your brain on papism.
There you go. Your papist host, working the technology. Sorry, we don't have a big budget like Reason and Theology, but I'm giving you top-of-the-line papist apologetics right here. Better than you've heard. I can defend it better than they can. All right. So we just covered with the typical sophistry and half-truths, the reason why First Constantinople and Malaysia is not a big deal. And so, all right, we got this question from Alec. If no pope, we don't know what councils are ecumenical. Checkmate conciliar. Absolutely, because Rome's got to consent to each council. It says so in Nicaea too. So how do you know the ecumenical councils without Rome? I mean, when's the last time they had an ecumenical council in the Orthodox Church? Obviously, us in the Roman Catholic Church, we had 21 ecumenical councils. We had 14 more. So clearly, the Orthodox are doing something wrong.
This is why you just need to become Protestant and just read your Bible under a tree. That's the solution to all this.
It's a solution. Now we got a call in coming, and I'm gonna purposely try to do the microphone in advance. All right, let's see if it works.
From
Rocky.
Hey, you're in the Orthodox Christian Theology call-in line. How can I help you?
Yes, hello, Mr. Trulia. I had an interesting question for you. Perhaps I can stump the chump, as they say.
Oh, give it a shot.
Good
Remember,
luck.
this is not Mike Lofton. This is not Eric Ybarra, so you're not stumping me.
Indeed, I know this is a pretty heavy hitter I'm on the line with. That's why it took a lot of courage for me to call. So I hope you'll be patient with me.
And it'll take me not so much courage to hang up on you. So let's come out with it.
Indeed. So, as you mentioned that there were 21 ecumenical councils held to by your church. Is that correct?
Something along that number, yeah. Why not?
Okay. So what do you make about the previously held to 8th Ecumenical Council of the reunion with Constantinople held in 879 through 880, which actually completely anathematized anyone that held to the Filioque and the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, in regards to also considering retroactively the other councils to be robber councils. And then it was previously held to as being completely ecumenical until Pope John VIII, I believe, repudiated it and went back and retroactively regarded it as being a robber council and considered it so at Florence. How would you answer that question?
All right, thank you for calling. All right, now let's answer that question. And we're going to get into Constantinople IV. So much misinformation about Constantinople IV. And so I'm going to have to now lay the record straight. Number one, it did not anathematize the Filioque. It anathematized adding to the creed. And that being said, that was an issue because Rome at that time didn't have the Filioque in their creed. It wasn't part of their practice. But it did not anathematize the Filioque doctrine. And we know well that you could adjust the creed with correct doctrine. The Constantinopolitan Creed was an adjustment of the Nicene Creed. So this is something that we allow. Also, if you read the Council of Ephesus and the Council of Chalcedon, we see that the actual Constantinopolitan Creed itself, as well as the Nicene Creed, went through certain developments and slight changes grammatically. So to originally legalistically read Constantinople IV saying that you couldn't add something that was correct doctrine, like and the Son, to the Creed, clearly that's not what Rome consented to when they at least sent legates to the council in support of it. But this brings me to my second point, which is the council was not accepted by Rome. The legates falsified the letters. The legates came back. They were disowned by John VIII. Then a deacon was then sent to Rome who became the next pope, who then disowned the council. And particularly was over the issue of Bulgaria because Pope John VIII did not consent to the fact that they were going to lose Bulgarian jurisdiction. And so, quite frankly, this is something that Orthodox say over and over and over, but the facts are just not with them. In fact, there's a commentorium within Session 4, if I remember right, in the Council of Constantinople, 879-880. In that commentorium, Pope John VIII gives a list of demands that must be met for him to accept the council. And in that council, they don't meet all those demands. And so that's why when he wrote back to Constantinople, when he got word of what his legates had done in accepting the council, he said, "We only accept what we've already accepted in my original letter to you. Whatever else you promulgated, we do not accept." So what's that mean for the council? It means the Pope accepted what he already taught and what he demanded the council accept. When the council went aberrant and went beyond what the Pope commanded them to do, went beyond what he decreed, obviously the papacy did not accept. And we already stated, an ecumenical council is only ecumenical if the Bishop of Rome consents to it. So whatever he didn't consent to was not ecumenical. So there you go. Disproved the fake Orthodox apologetics again with a mix of history and good old Popesplaining. All right? And it's okay when I say Popesplaining. It's bad when you say it. All right? So, Other Paul, you've been quiet for a little bit. Do you have any comments? You want to lay another one on me?
Yes, indeed. Plenty of very elaborate Jesuitical casuistry and copium. But, so, that's my basic summary of all these responses so far. But I'd also like to ask you, Mr. Craig, there's another Eastern Orthodox YouTuber, coincidentally by the same name, Craig Truglia.
I know that guy.
And he created he posted a documentary published by another guy called, well, coincidentally, also called The Other Paul. I'm not the same guy. So quite a big coincidence there. They published a documentary called Who Started the Great Schism, which very definitively demonstrated that Rome was at fault according to the historic standards and canons of the early church with respect to the schism. And since Rome started that schism, clearly the papacy can't be true, because schism being such a grave sin, ecclesial, that can't be something that the papacy could commit. The papacy can't be in schism with the church. The papacy is the church, principally. How do you respond to the documentary?
Well, 1, Craig's a liar. 2, Craig is ugly. 3, Craig's an idiot. 4, Craig's a jerk. So why would I even deal with the documentary when he's a liar, he's a jerk, he's ugly, he's all sorts of things? Right? Why even deal with it seriously? It is worthy of a comedy hour. It's not worthy of a real dignified response. But I will say 2 things. 1, he misquoted a letter from Pope St. Gregory. Right? So if you misquoted a letter from Pope Gregory, ascribed it to him and not to the person writing it to him, then what else did he get wrong? Obviously everything. Right? Obviously everything. Now, number two, just because a canon of Constantinople I, which Rome didn't accept, says something that sounds inconsistent, if Rome doesn't accept it, then it's irrelevant for our purposes. So the whole premise, the whole way the documentary starts is completely irrelevant to what the teaching of the papacy is in the church. Because again, in the Formula Hermistas, it says that the faith is always unsullied and it must always be attached to the Church of Rome. All right? So who am I going to take? Seriously. The Formula Hermistas, which the whole Eastern Church accepted as much as 2,500 separate priests, so bishops and priests and other clerics? Or some guy, some idiot, some jerk, some ugly dude named Craig Truglia? Obviously, Hermistas, not Craig Truglia.
Clearly, that was a tour de force response. I'm going to call up, make sure Lofton gets a Reason and Theology comedy hour happening, because that was decisive.
All right, well, it's good. I put
You
Craig in his
converted me.
place.
You converted me.
Now, Zane's got the question, Catholic Craig, do you believe the doctrine evolves a la Newman? Of course, when it suits my purposes. All right? So that's, and mostly with Orthodox. With Protestants, no. All right,
Yep.
That makes all the sense.
This is the saying I go by, that my Catholic friends, they always go by, and I think you Catholic Craig also do as well. When you do it, when you Protestants and Orthodox do it, it's novelty. When we do it, it's Newmany.
There you go. There's a Newman revolution, and I'm on board with it. Now, let's see. Call-in line only allows you to leave voicemail and forces you to hang up. I'm probably just a technological boomer, though. I mean, maybe. We just got 2 people on. So obviously you're doing something wrong. It's not me clicking the buttons. All right, not me clicking the button. That's absolutely true. Christians do not need Pope. I beg to differ. That's cope, my friend. That's cope. They do need the Pope. He's a visible principle of unity. What's your visible principle of unity? Jesus, right? When did you see him last? There you go. There you go. Got you. All right. I'm a papist Orthodox. I believe in papism of Jesus Christ, the Lord God and man. Again, when's the last time you saw Jesus? Where's the visible principle of unity? You need a visible principle of unity. It's in Unitatum 3:1. Look it up.
Whoop. Is Craig breaking up?
Unitatum.
Whoop.
All right.
Okay, I think he's back.
They're looking. Now I'm back. They're looking for Pope Dioscorus. Again, he was not infallible, so what he thinks is irrelevant. And if I break up, you take the football and run, other ball, just so you know. All right, let's see. How can papists know they are infallibly interpreting the Pope's infallible statements correctly? Again, that would destroy low IQ papal apologists, but it does not destroy this papal apologist, because I will concede that interpretation is a basic problem the human condition due to sin, and that we need God's grace. I'm a good Augustinian papal apologist. So that's relevant. It doesn't make it less true. Just because you can't interpret an infallible statement, it doesn't mean that a pope ex cathedra can't teach infallibly. I'm just not making the epistemic necessity argument, because that's not necessary. I'm making the argument that it's true. Whether it's most prudential that epistemically for there to be the papacy is kind of irrelevant to the question. We say, wait, is Craig being a devil's advocate? Obviously. Is he new to the channel? What do you think of
What,
the
you
ball?
think he just converted overnight or something?
I think people are afraid like he's doing too good a job at doing this.
Real.
It's the reality is, if you've studied this really well and you've heard just even half of their nonsense, you could kind of see the sort of arguments that make the source material. Yeah. So like even with Constantinople 4, there's probably some things I said tonight that really bothered people because they don't know enough about it. So the more you know about something, you could actually make better arguments than the ones they're making. So
yeah, that's true.
There you go.
That's a good demonstration. Jokes aside, that's actually a great demonstration of like, well, basically your requisite study of the other side, how well you can represent them, and thus looks very good for when you do respond to them. I did the same on because I was just on Eli Ayala's channel, Revealed Apologetics, and he basically told me to do the same thing, steelman the papacy, and that's more or less what I did. They basically center on the thing that the papacy, he's the principle of unity, Matthew 16, Irenaeus, so on and so forth. Did my best with that, but it's a good exercise. It's a good exercise to engage in every now and then.
It's that's precisely what I did when I went into St. Augustine's Filioque and showing that he taught Orthodox doctrine. The whole first article was arguing that he was a Filioquist and showing that I understood where they got it from. And I remember one guy actually wrote to me, he's like, wait, this is pretty convincing. I'm like, well, then I've done my job. Now let me take the next 8 articles and disprove it. So there we go. We got.
Anyway, where's Catholic Craig? Where'd he go?
Where'd he go? We have the papacy only accepted nuance within the council, again, when it suits us. Popesplaining does equal believing in the apostolic doctrine and the papacy. It's like, don't mansplain, Popesplaining is me telling you what you ought to believe about the papacy. So there you go.
And guys, remember, as he said before, don't use the P word. It's okay for his group to use it, not us.
Now again, guys, your opportunity, call-in lines below. Your opportunity to call in is below, and we'll get you in. Otherwise, we're going to keep with the things here in the chat box. Eastern Orthodox started the schism by creating demonic lists containing many hilariously faulty lists, which motivate Greeks to hate the Latins. That's a new one, but thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so all sorts of demonic stuff, of course. That's obviously what happened.
The Greeks were clearly demons. I mean, hey, the word demon itself comes from daimon. That's a Greek word. Explain that. Explain that, Greeks.
That's a good point. And obviously they're a poorer country than the United States. And the United States has a lot more Roman Catholics than Greeks has the Orthodox. And so obviously God forsook the Greeks because of the schism. Clearly. How obvious is that? Now, how would all Craig respond to bronze plates in the Nicene Creed without the heresy of the Filioque? This is so easy. They were just being nice, man. They just put up some bronze plates without the Filioque. They didn't confess it, the Filioque at that time. But yet Pope Leo III actually wrote to, I forget which Carolingian bishop, that they may teach the Filioque by being sung and not added to the creed, because the Pope didn't give permission to it at that time because the Roman Synod hadn't changed their creed yet. But the Roman Synod has it in their right to change the creed. They just didn't do it yet. So it's sort of like this is the symbolic thing to put these bronze plates up, but it means absolutely nothing. All right, and it doesn't matter where it is, St. Peter's Basilica. Again, it means absolutely nothing. All right, so let's see. You got any more ones you want to lay on me, Other Paul? You went into Honorius. I smacked that down.
Man, there's an entire library of proofs against the papacy. It takes me so long just to pick one out. There's so many good ones. Come from so many different angles. So many.
All right, well, you would think of that. Why is Pope rhyme with Cope? Again, it doesn't in Latin. It does not in Latin. All right, so don't matter.
Okay, here's a good one.
All right.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier Irenaeus. He proves the Roman supremacy, the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome over the whole church. Now, That comes chiefly from his book 3, chapter 3, in Against Heresies. Now, what does he mention? He mentions it's necessary to obey Rome, the church, collective. Notice how he doesn't specify the bishop, but the whole church. That's a key thing to know.
Well, Romans is sin. Big deal.
Clearly vestigial of their plural episcopacy, which did exist. Now, on top of that, he says, why should we obey them? Well, because they represent, the apostolic teaching passed down by Peter and Paul, and also as reflected in the worldwide church. So, in other words, the authority of Rome in Irenaeus' mind is, at least in part, if not primarily, premised on the fact that they reflect the wider church. So the principle of truth is not merely Rome itself, but actually the whole church, and Rome is simply an artifact of that. But even more importantly, if Irenaeus really was doing that, if he was bringing about asserting Roman primacy, and this is the very area to do it, why does he not mention the keys? Why does he not mention the rock? Why does he not mention
those are arguments from silence?
Why does he miss
we got to dispense those arguments from silence. That's a logical fallacy. Those are arguments from silence. I won't even dignify arguments of silence with a response, number one. Number two, that visible principle of unity is actually very relevant in this section because, quite frankly, those other people are in Rome. And that because they're in Rome, that shows Rome's preeminent authority. So it's their attachment to the Roman Synod and to the Pope. And it comes down to it, all the king's horses, all the king's men can't undo the fact that that preeminent authority is of Rome. And yes, it is sourced in Saints Peter and Paul. Saint Peter the keys, and Saint Paul also because he is the second greatest apostle because of evangelism work and the local jurisdiction of Rome, because Rome is both universal and local jurisdiction, is from Paul, and the universal jurisdiction is from Peter. So all of it's right there in Book 3, Chapter 3 of Against Heresies. So that's that.
Every single one of those nuances is directly in there. You can directly read it, guys.
So that being said, Maximus the Confessor, the Roman Church, the greatest among them, as a common stronghold and foundation, as being according to the Savior's promise, forever invincible against the gates of hell. And there you go. What more do you want? I don't need to cite this. You know Maximus said it because you know in your heart it's true. What more is it to be said? We have Lateran 649 in the Greek. We got stuff in the PG where he's saying things just the same. He says that ecumenical councils solely rely upon the authority of the Church of Rome, and that's in the PG in the Greek. So it's again Maximus the Confessor, full blown papist. Now let's see. We got this. You can tell the fruits of the schismatics when they are after leaving the body of Christ, set up their own parallel patriarchal jurisdictions. Again, Rome didn't do this earlier out of condescension to the Eastern churches. But the Eastern churches got so heretical that they made issues over beards. They made issues over bread. They made issues over the filioque, where obviously the Western church always taught the filioque. Saint Cyril of Alexandria taught the filioque. Saint Maximus taught the filioque. They all taught the filioque. That they had no choice for the sake or the salvation of souls to make new bishoprics. Because again, it's not a parallel bishopric that is schism. It's only if the parallel bishopric is not in communion with the Bishop of Rome. So when the Donatists made a parallel bishopric in Rome and made their own Bishop of Rome, of course that was schism. Because schism, by definition, is not being in communion with the Bishop of Rome. But when the Bishop of Rome does it, that's not the case because whoever they consecrate as bishop is in communion with the Pope. So definitionally, that is not schism. Basic stuff. Basic stuff. You guys got to try harder than that. Got to try harder. We got this from the other Nathaniel. Fourth Lateran Council declares that all the apostles see the keys to the kingdom directly from Christ. This dogmatic Roman statement validates the other Paul's reading of the text. And
that's right.
Again, councils can make errors in fact. The scriptures say specifically historically what happened. So I could maybe spiritualize the Lateran Council and say, well, other apostles received keys as in binding loosely, but they not receive the keys. Those were only given to Peter, who's the rock, the foundation of the church, from Christ, solely from Christ. And how do I know this? Because it says solely from Christ in the minutes of Nicaea 2 in session 2 of the council, which the whole council received the letter of Pope Adrian to the emperors. And so This is something that was accepted for centuries before latter maybe nuanced things. So yes, there's a sense that the other bishops bind loose, and you could call those keys, but those are not the keys. Those explicit historical keys are given to Peter because that's in the scriptures. All right, so we got that.
Many layers of nuance indeed.
Now with your layers of nuance. If adding the Filioque Creed to the Nicene Consponsoline Creed was fine because it was correct doctrine, why did the popes not add it in the 7th or 8th century? Again, out of condescension. Out of condescension. The Eastern churches weren't ready for it yet. We know this because in the 7th century, St. Maximus had a right to them to talk him off the ledge. And no one wrote back to St. Maximus saying, oh, that's still not right. Oh, okay, sounds legit. So just the Roman Church was condescending themselves for the salvation as many until this was an unsalvageable situation. Because think about this. Orthodoxy is a shrinking group of people. What, 150 million on earth? But there's over 1 billion Roman Catholics, right? Over 1 billion. So obviously the church has more people is obviously the correct church. And they made the right call at the right time in history to save as many souls as possible because all these things are providential. All these things are providential.
Clearly,
See, right? Seamus is helping me out. There's absolutely no unity in the false Greek sect. No one accepted the so-called Ecumenical Council of 2016. If your religion is based on Ecumenical Council, which you can't call, there's no basis for your religion. Checkmate. What more is there to be said? Checkmate. Thank you, Seamus. Checkmate. And let's see. We have repeated how could the whole thing with epistemic certainty again. I'm making a higher level argument. It's not about
give me 1 second. I'm going to grab something which I want to read to you.
All right. Well, the other Paul is stepping out, so I'm going to make him like smaller screen if I'm able to. And guys, we don't have any call in. This is your opportunity. Now we say. Ephesus says Peter will live in his Roman successors forever. Orthodox say it's flowering language. It doesn't mean what it says. How do you respond? Of course it means what it says. Because they didn't call him crazy. They didn't say he was wrong. Unless they said, we don't believe you. You are wrong. This means the council accepted it. What else is there to be said? And at the very least, even saying they disagreed, which I do not concede in this situation, even if they disagreed, this shows like with Pope Victor, this was a consistent ecclesiology down into the 2nd century. We go to St. Ignatius, to the turn of the 2nd century. St. Ignatius knew the Apostle John. This is apostolic. Papalism is apostolic, and you're finding it from the earliest documents of the church, St. Ignatius, St. Irenaeus, in Eusebius quoting Pope Victor. We're seeing this the Council of Ephesus, which is the first ecumenical council where we actually have complete minutes. So I'm sure in the early ecumenical councils, they were saying things about the Pope as well. We just don't have their complete minutes. So from the very earliest council that we have all the minutes, we have papalism in it. Then we have Chalcedon. We have Leo called Archbishop of the world. So we have papalism and Chalcedon, and on we go. On and on we go.
Now, Craig, I'd like to bring up another objection. So, do you believe the letter of 1 Clement proves the papacy?
No, I don't make that argument. I think it could be read both ways. I think it's consistent with the papacy, but it's not an absolute necessity to use that as a proof text. It's because we know the papacy is true from other documents that, taken as a whole, 1 Clement proves the papacy. But in isolation, right, if you were to read it out of context without other documents from the same era, then I can see an argument legitimately being made. But if you read it in the context of all the other pro-papal documents in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, now we understand that 1 Clement is showing direct jurisdiction in a foreign church in Corinth.
Okay. But you do believe, as you said earlier, that St. Ignatius clearly proves the papacy, right?
Clearly, because look, in chapter 9, in his letter to the Romans, he says, remember in your prayers the church in Syria, which now has God for its shepherd instead of me. Jesus Christ alone will oversee it. The word in the Greek is epiokopesei. All right, so I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's saying bishoping, literally saying bishoping as a verb. All right, so Jesus alone will bishop it, and kai in the Greek, and your love. And when it says your love, it's stronger in the Greek because you have the definite article. It says, and
That's how it works. Yeah.
your love, right? So, and the Church of Rome. So this shows clearly that the Vicar of Christ and Christ himself have direct jurisdiction in Antioch in Ignatius' absence. So how clear do you want a Vatican I prerogative? You have it from the turn of the 2nd century from the disciple of St. John himself.
Now, if you do believe that, Craig, if it really is so clear, then how do you explain the fact that one of your highest, arguably the highest tier living papal apologists today, Eric Ibarra, disagrees with you? I have his book right here. It's on the paper.
Because again, he uses
Here's the one paragraph he says.
All right, read it. Read the book.
What he says. Another common reference is to the holy martyr Saint Ignatius of Antioch, whose letter to the church at Rome described her as one who, quote, presides over love, unquote. This may have been used to argue using such terms as preside and love for the presidency of St. Peter's successor over the universal church, otherwise signified by the community of the agape, love, that is the universal church. While that is certainly possible, it can also mean something far less papal than this. With that said, the majority of scholars acknowledge that the Roman Church was active in coming to the aid of many churches, even distant to itself. But, like the letter of Pope St. Clement I, this letter of St. Ignatius can be read in many more ways than one and should be disqualified from being considered as a strong and conclusive historical evidence on which to base the papal primacy. If it's so clear, how come he says this? Please explain, Craig.
Because that book is low-tier apologetics. All right? I could write that book 1,000 times better than he wrote that book, as this show already shows. All right? Because he literally started, turned to the first and then second chapter, and he stopped reading. He didn't go read the chapter 9. Because I just showed you in the Greek has the definite article and the word "and" in the Greek, literally equating both Christ and the Church of Rome as being bishoping the church in Syria, the church at Antioch. All right? And so the reason he's making that argument because he hasn't read his stuff. I've read my stuff, and that's why I can tell you otherwise.
Interesting. Very, very interesting what you have to say there.
Now we got this question. If papacy true, why use many forgeries? And I'm just going to spin this on this head. Where they get the ideas for in the forgeries, right? The idea had to exist to write it down onto paper, right? So where do you get the idea from? And so people who read these forgeries, by the way, go, oh, well, that's a low-tier argument. Well, have you ever read what the forgeries say and what they're quoting? So, for example, the pseudo-Symmachus forgeries, which, by the way, were really written during Pope Symmachus's, papacy, so I don't see what's so pseudo about them. It says, oh, well, the Pope could be judged by no one. And people are like, oh, it's in a forgery, so it's not true. Problem is, there's no debate 100 years before Pope Zosimus said the same exact thing to the church in Carthage. Same thing. They're quoting Pope Zosimus. Nothing new there. There's nothing you're not going to find in Gelasius and in Zosimus that's in the Symmachus forgeries. All right? So was there a historical circumstance where it made sense to write these things down, to collate them, in order to pretty much prevent the Ostrogoths from manipulating the Roman Synod? Of course. But they were taking things that already existed. And if people read Pope Zosimus or people read Pope Gelasius, they would know there's nothing new here. And they're being applied in exactly the same sense. Take my word on it, right? Papist Craig wouldn't lie to you about that. All right? So they're saying these things in exactly the same sense. And we could go on and on and on. The same is true of the Pseudo-Isidorian Decretals. The point is, if all the same stuff is in other sources, then just it also being found in the forgery doesn't... That's like saying, because there's fake $100 bills, there's no real $100 bills. That's a stupid argument.
That's a very, very interesting historical standard there you got, Catholic Craig. So if there's a forgery that argues for something, that should actually prove that that thing is real.
Something like that. All right, now we got something here. There exists then an inferior deity according to the theologians who are wise in the things of God, which is a gift of the transcendent one, Gregory Palamas. Yeah, that don't sound good. That definitely sounds pretty polytheistic-y. So you go into schism and you get all this polytheism. Thank you, Xavier. Now, let's see. Call in through the line in the description to give your arguments against Catholic Craig. They don't have the Corleones to do it. No Coleon, Southern
Doesn't look
Pole.
like it.
They don't have the
Doesn't look
Coleons
like it.
because they know I'll smack them down. That's what it comes
That's
down
true.
to.
That's true.
Right?
Papalism
You know,
indicated.
I smack down more weight than that 800-page book. So we got this. How about Antioch? Can he have no authority claim? Can he have no authority claim the primacy since they have only evidence the see of Peter, whereas according to Eusebius is still debatable in relation to Rome see of Peter. Could you translate what Father Rick's getting at to me? I don't quite get it.
Okay, but authority since they only have evidence to see of Peter, whereas according to you, it's all debated in relation to Rome see of Peter. No authority
All right,
claim.
well, Father Rick,
Can he have? Wait, bring it back. Bring it
Wait,
back.
wait,
I think
wait.
I was asking.
ask it more
Can
clearly.
he have no authority claim the primacy since they have only evidence the see of Peter? Okay, I think what he's
Is he
trying
saying
to
that
say-
Antioch also has Petrine prerogatives?
I think what he's trying to say is that Antioch is the only one with evidence that was actually founded by Peter, whereas Rome almost certainly wasn't.
Yeah, again, but you're not going to have a single
Therefore, they have a
answer.
better claim, maybe?
That's a modern liberal scholarly just hypothesis. But again, no one Orthodox, Catholic, Oriental, no one holds this. It's just liberal scholars. Every saint that's ever commented on the question said St. Peter was martyred in Rome and his relics are in Rome. So that's literal archaeological evidence when you have his actual relics there. So there you go. Let's see. We have... We're running out of time for the call-ins, guys. We're going to be packing it up
Come
soon.
on, people. Call it in. Destroy Catholic Craig.
Look at that. Hey, Zay, remember I made you quit Craig's server? I think he got banned, to be fair to him, because he was making up stuff about sources. He was doing what I'm doing now, which I wouldn't tolerate in a non-satire. How about that? Though, Xavier, if you admit it's satire, I will let you back on. As long as it's satire. Then you could Popesplain all day. Popesplain away. Now let's see. We have people argue back and forth. We have the forgeries question. Let's see. I think I went too far up. We have Shiny Diamond saying the thing for St. Gregory Palamas is a mistranslation. No, Xavier's not wrong. Why? Because I say so. All right. Now we have St. Cyril explicitly agreed with that because he was Catholic and not a schismatic. Absolutely. Because St. Cyril believed in the Filioque because it's Catholic doctrine, right? Now we have the Greek here, guys, so here you go. Go translate yourself. Of course, the other Paul can't translate that Greek because it's a Neo-Attic Greek and he reads Koine Greek, but there you go.
That's true.
Do you want to read it just for fun?
I can get like basic. Theote. Catatus Theosophus Theologus Doron was like very rough senses I can get, but yeah, that's the later kind. That's the later kind. I'm more the Attic Koine boy.
Now the question is, Xavier is a said, but he says yes. Who are you? So you don't know. You got to be down Pope Francis. That's how this works. You can't not have a pope and be a papist. Come on, what is that?
That's true. That's true.
What is that?
Craig, Catholic Craig, what's your evaluation of Pope Francis? Is he literally Hitler, or is he like the best thing ever?
No, man, Hitler's way worse than Pope Francis. Pope Francis is a pretty sweet dude. I have a beer with him. You wouldn't? Come on. Who wouldn't have a beer, Pope Francis? Pretty cool guy. All right, now Xavier says Eric Ibarra has a lot of liberal tendencies because of influence of Dr. Richard Price. Sadly, no, it's because we don't understand, Xavier. Is that we need the scholarship, we need the nuance, we need the Newman, we need all these things to hold the whole thing together. All right, we need all these things. There's nothing wrong with taking a little from column A, taking from a little column B, because it's about defending the papacy. All right, so we got that. Now we got people arguing there. What about the Council of Jerusalem, Acts 15? Peter and Paul submitted to St. James. No, they let St. James talk, right? We see this, like, for example, Council of Nicaea, St. Hosius of Cordoba presided over the council out of respective age, right? And so out of respect to it being Jerusalem, they defer to St. James to give his own personal judgment, which does occur in councils, right? Each bishop gives a judgment in the council. But St. Peter is taught the same doctrine that he taught in Acts chapter 10. Acts chapter 11. He taught the same doctrine. So really, it was St. Peter that decreed, and everyone else then consented to his decree, as they ought. That shows us how the church ought to work, because we ought to function as the apostles did. So there we go. Acts 15, proven to be papist. All right, now we said, who was in charge of the council? Who speaks the apostolic decree? Who resolves the issue? Again, St. Peter, of course. He issued the decree and everyone followed him.
Catholic
now
keep going.
Yes, Paul, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was gonna say, what's your evaluation of the Eliakim typology argument? Do you think that's definitive papal proof?
I mean, it's not definitive, but obviously it makes sense being that St. Peter is alone given the keys. It can't be coincidence.
Okay.
Right? Like, I'm not going to tell you in isolation to accept it. See, I'm not giving low-tier papal arguments, right? You know, I'm giving better arguments than they give. So I'm not going to say in isolation
He's calling it low tier, man. He's calling it out.
And in isolation it doesn't prove it. That's ridiculous. The point is, Matthew 16:18 is crystal clear. And so because that's crystal clear, we can see the more opaque things in light of what's crystal clear. Obviously. So we got Seamus saying the majority of so-called forgeries are taken from previous sources and compiled to new documents. So I actually agree with Craig's straw man, because it's not a straw man, it's truth. It's truth. All right? So there you go. The CCC, the Catechism of Catholic Craig. There you go. And I'll do you one better. Mine will include the death penalty, because people like killing. Right? There you go. There you go.
I'm one step closer to papism now.
All right, make an AI version of what I'm doing now, and that AI Craig will make the death penalty back in the CCC.
Let's go.
All right. How about Saint Leo the Great? Saint Leo the Great obviously was an infallibility machine. He thought he was so infallible it wasn't funny. Yeah, and I'm quoting Xavier. That's my source. Now, there's no other source for that, but I take it on good authority. So there you go. Good authority. Where is papacy in the Bible? Matthew 16:18, Acts chapter 15. I mean, St. Peter is given in John 21, he's told to shepherd the lambs. I mean, how many proof texts do you want? How many proof texts do you want? It's just so many. Now we have, this is a good one. Norm MacDonald had a running joke of where do you get your ideas from? And I think like the other Paul said earlier, when you actually study a subject a lot, you could steel man it. You could do a good job defending it because you actually understand the history. You understand what other people screw around with the history, and then you could spit it out, but do it in a more nuanced, hyper-charitable way than they do it.
That's true. That's true.
Let's see. We have people just arguing with each other. The
As
Performance
usual.
Aesthetic says Saint Pope Peter I wrote more books in the Bible than any of the other original disciples. No, Paul doesn't count. Boom. Protodoxy refuted. Literally. Again, he only needed 2 letters to get his point across. He only had 2 encyclicals. Where's papal encyclical? Dude, there's 1st and 2nd Peter papal encyclicals. We got 1st Clement that's a papal encyclical. We got 2nd Clement that's a papal encyclical. We got several papal encyclicals in the 1st century. How's that true if there's no papacy? Catholic Craig, do you agree that first among equals is just a contradictory gobbledygook? How can you be first if you're among equals? Yeah, obviously that's ridiculous. I mean, come on. We know from the Council of Sardica that there's different precedents in who gets appeals, and the Bishop of Rome gets appeals. We see this with people appealing to Rome in the Athanasian controversy, during the Nestorian controversy, during the Eutychian controversy, and on we go. We see this after Nicaea too. They appeal again to the Pope of Rome, like St. Theodore the Studite. So, like, how can you be first among equals when they appeal to you above other people, right? So clearly it's gobbledygook, the primacy of honor. It's honor, but there's actual canonical order. I mean, it's honor, but the canonical order actually determines who takes appeals. Like, come on. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. All right, let's see. Seds are neo-Protestant. They follow religion of the empty chair because they personally interpret it that way. Well, again, I have a higher tier argument. All have personal interpretation, but yes, it's a kind of Protestantism because there's always a visible principle of unity, and that is the successor of St. Peter.
Real.
And sometimes there's even two, right? Pope Martin, Pope Eugene, but one of them just became not Pope, right? Because there's only one. So there you go. Corey says, Council of Jerusalem illustrates the keys were given to all the apostles because even Peter submitted to James. No, because the word keys isn't there. You're just making it up. Just making it up. All right. So again, right? You got to make stuff up. You can't be right, correct? Can't be right. You're making stuff up.
Real.
So let's see. We're almost done with the questions. People really hating on Xavier. Hey, Xavier does a great job explaining. I got his back on this show. No problem. You know, see, Saint Leo was indeed a papist. Of course, he was an infallibility machine, quoting Xavier. In Isaiah 22, of course. Of course. All right, Sean says, if papacy true, why Canon 6 in Nicaea say that Rome is the first because of custom? Because that custom comes from the apostles and from Jesus himself. Duh.
Real.
I mean, it's custom. I mean, 2 Thessalonians 2:15. You know, stay with the traditions I've sent you either by word of mouth or letter, right? We saw that word traditions, same thing as custom. It's in the scriptures. In the scriptures.
Yeah.
You know, let's see. Smith to Rome, you first. And this proves when people are not Roman Catholic, it's out of pride. It's out of pride. They cannot humble themselves and accept that we have a visible and principle unity. He teaches infallibly that he has a spiritual charism that you will never have unless you're Pope. That takes humility. All right? It takes humility. And that's why we see a lot of people bringing Protestant baggage with them into the Orthodox Church. And we also see Orthodox, because they've been in schism for 1,000 years, lacking humility. Have you ever noticed that their apologists are by far the least charitable people you'll ever see? Because they lack humility. They don't have a Pope. That's why. All right. And by the way, if the papacy wasn't so necessary, why are they coming up with the ecumenical patriarch doing all the same things? Because they're realizing they need this. To quote Patriarch Bartholomew, to say that there's not a first without equals, and I'm quoting what's coming out of the chancery of the ecumenical patriarch, to say there's not a first without equals is a Protestant heresy. Your own Orthodox bishops admit that. So Xavier, through the most blessed Peter, chief of the apostles, the Holy Roman Church holds the principate over all the churches of the whole world. Pope Leo, right? He is the principate of the whole world that the primates shall see. Right? Obviously that means they have infallibility, direct jurisdiction, everything in Vatican I. It's ridiculous to say it means anything else. All right. Now
no one else calling?
And then we have the claim that according to New Advent letter 65 from Leo is pseudonymous. Oh, is that true? Let's see. New Advent Leo letter 65, was it? I'm not looking at the screen. All right. Letter 65. But wait a second. 65 isn't in the corpus that is in New Advent. So it looks like misinformation again. You got to defend the misinformation. No way to debate against the papacy. It's because it's true. You got to come up with stuff. All right, now we've got
Father James right here.
This is exactly how I imagine Catholic Craig would be. LOL. I think actually I'd be less of a jerk to be honest. Like, hey, let me just break the third wall or whatever it's called down and just say that, like, in reality, like, I actually don't dislike Roman Catholicism. Like, I say this all the time. Like, I wish I could walk down the street and go to church there. It'd just be so much easier. I like the people. I think there's a lot of things aesthetically that are very pleasing. And so I really don't dislike Roman Catholicism. There'd really be nothing stopping me being Roman Catholic other than the fact of it not.
Oh, Craig frozen? Thank you. That freeze frame, someone screenshot that. Oh no, Craig. Oh no, Catholic Craig is gone.
Being true at all.
Right,
literally.
Oh, okay, he's coming back, kinda.
You're on the line and I'm going to plug you into the show. Okay, so caller hung up. No more caller.
No.
All right.
Come on.
That's no fun. All right. I'm plugging my good microphone back in.
Please.
You know, he knew I was going to smack him down. That's what it comes down to it. A charitable
Who was the
nuance
caller?
smackdown. All right? A
Who was the
charitable nuance
caller?
smackdown. So, we got this. The words of one Roman legate and the fiat of Pope St. Leo the Great are the reason that you don't accept the monophysite Robert Council of Ephesus. Exactly, right? Contradictor, right? If it weren't for that legate saying that Ephesus Ephesian Council would have been ecumenical, but it's the superiority of the Bishop of Rome over councils which prevented heresy from overtaking the church. Thank you, Xavier. So the call's going back in. All right, caller, I am adding
Father James.
Father James.
Hey, let's go.
To send
Once-
voicemail, press 2.
Oh, I don't want him voicemail. We're bringing Father James in, but I got to adjust the microphone so we could hear him. All right, so Father James, you're on. You could talk, Father.
Hey, how's it going?
Man, you are like way boosted audio on this thing.
I'm low on the audio, or do I need to be louder?
Well, you're just very echoey. Where are you?
Yeah.
Anglican bomb shelter?
I am having a wild party as we priests always do. I'm actually printing out all the bulletins for Sunday.
Well, that's right. You got your own parish now. In your own parish, now, like, do people like, oh man, the priest does apologetics online, or they just not know what's going on?
They do. They like it, actually.
Oh, there you go.
But I purposefully separate the two precisely because I have been harassed before by people online, and they have called like prior churches that I've been a part of and stuff. So I'm not interested in having that brought to my parish. So.
And how many people are in your parish?
We have about 60 or so.
There you go. Which for Orthodox parish should be very strong. So, and for a Roman Catholic parish should be very weak. So that being said, Father, lay it on me. Throw me your toughest anti-papist slur, and I'm going to show you that you're wrong. I'm going to Popesplain you away.
I mean, do you want a real one or a fake one?
Give me your toughest one.
The real one. Okay, so one of the issues I do have is, I mean, it's not so much specifically how Vatican I talks about the papacy and how all of the venerable fathers teach things like papal supremacy and all that sort of stuff. And it just seems to be contradictory to even what their own allegedly infallible documents will say, such as like Lateran 4, Canon 1 is a big one, where it talks about how Jesus gives the keys to all of the apostles and to all of their successors, rather than to see them for them. So, I don't see Vatican I, some of all, I don't see Vatican I as consistent with church history or scripture.
Boom. Boom.
Well, you don't, but I do.
Well, yeah, of course.
And that being said, you know, errors and facts could be made by saints. We don't say that saints are infallible. You know, it comes down to it. The scriptures infallibly say, Matthew 16:18, keys given to Peter. What else is there to be said? So that's the toughest one you got on. That's the toughest one you got for me.
I don't know, like just immediately comes to mind. Yeah.
All right, now I'll give you. I'm gonna have to hang up the phone. Give me your fake one. It's your opportunity.
Oh, well, I gotta read it because I posted it. Let me see. What was it I said? I can't find it. Dead air.
All right, when we come across, we'll answer. It's nice having you on, Father.
I got it.
Ah,
If
Gotcha,
the
Father.
gospel is true, can the Pope tell me what I'm thinking about right now?
well, again, if it's doctrinal, yes. All right, so thank you for coming on, Father. It was great having you on, and it was great knowing that obviously I could Popesplain it away. So that's it. Father's off. The phone line is open. We are going to take questions for 5 more minutes. So this is your last opportunity to call. All right. So last opportunity to call. Now we have, let's see. Why argue with someone who simultaneously believes the Roman episcopate cannot err or fall and maintains that there is no episcopate? Schizophrenic. Again, yeah, because that's why Xavier's wrong. There has to be a visible principle of unity. Now this guy has anti-Nicene audio. Yeah, Father James. That was pretty anti-Nicene. That's like phonograph. That was some phonograph level audio quality.
I mean, I think that was pretty much everybody to an extent that has called in so far, just because of the nature of like how the call-ins are working.
Well, it's better than nothing. That's for sure. Now I'm not seeing other questions up here, and so last opportunity for questions. We got Norber's Ordo is typically for the Latin Rite churches, not so much for Eastern rites. And again, that's another thing. We've got the Eastern Rite. Roman Catholicism has more eternal diversity because we are universal. We're Catholic. The Orthodox aren't. They're just this ethnic enclave that they're not even really in communion with one another. I've heard there's this schism between Constantinople and Moscow. I mean, how do you know who's really in the Orthodox Church? It's ridiculous. Really? Now we have...
It's this reception theory, totally pure circle. That's all it is.
Yeah, there's no standard for truth if you're receiving it. Come on. Now we have for Catholic Craig. What about St. Theodore saying all patriarchs have the creed? St. Theodore the Studite. Again, he can make errors in facts, right? Saints can make errors in facts. And of course, all bishops could bind and loose, but they do so by virtue of their communion with the Bishop of Rome. All right? And that's why he exclusively, in an exclusive sense, has the keys, because Matthew 16:18 says so. All right? And so, that being said, dear Craig, what do you find more aesthetic in Catholicism than the Orthodox Church? That's a good
Catholic
question.
Craig or real Craig?
Well, I guess real Craig's dear Craig. Here's arguably more aesthetic would be the more modern art that isn't locked down by canonical standards like Orthodox iconography. So like if you go to churches in Rome, like I've been to Rome, they've got like this unbelievable, from a technical vantage point, unbelievable art, Gothic and Neo-Gothic influences in architecture, depending when the church was built. The use of stained glass, which is kind of an import into Orthodoxy in America, but not really historically Orthodox so much. So again, stained glass. Who doesn't like stained glass? Come on.
Yeah.
So that's aesthetically pleasing. Catchier tunes and Christmas carols. I mean, let's just be honest. You're not singing Orthodox hymns during Christmas. So there's a lot to be aesthetically pleasing. But just so people know I haven't gone off the rails, aesthetically pleasing and pleasing to the passions doesn't mean good for salvation. So these are different things. I, as an Orthodox Christian, this is of course going to sound nuts to a Protestant like the other Paul. I actually think there's canonical norms with iconography, with music, with architecture, because they're canonical because they are efficacious to the salvation of Orthodox people. Meaning they're not propitiatory for sins or something like that. Meaning the church has discerned that certain architecture gives us the mindset necessary for proper worship. That certain music gives us the mindset for proper worship. There's a great video that I have with, what's her name? Gigi Hadid, where we talk about this in music. And so, yes, from a technical vantage point, there's the world and other communions beat the Orthodox. Taller churches and more catchy music and fancier art, but it doesn't mean it's better for salvation. So that'd be the difference. But I could see why someone could see Gothic architecture, God big, you small. Well, I think that is good. That is something that is important. Compared to, let's say, a lot of Orthodox churches go by the basilica, and that's actually from the Roman civil model to show that the priesthood of believers, and so they serve different functions in that sense spiritually. And I do see certain things in the Roman Catholic communion that could be edifying, though honestly, just to be completely transparent, I do think they're inferior to what the Orthodox provide, but not technically speaking. I'm speaking spiritually. So, all right, I had to give a serious answer, so that's not a lot of fun. All right, we got economia is being used extremely liberally with a complete disregard for a creed view. Would you agree? Of course, because they call everything economia, right? They call everything economia. Why can't they just say disciplinary canons are wrong and stick with the things that are right? That faith and morals is right and discipline is fallible. This whole economia thing just lets you just make up stuff like they did with birth control, right? You got synods with birth control and just abandoning the historical faith. And, they'll have female priesthoods because of economia and all that. So, yeah, that's a problem. Slap some Newman on it. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Full blown. He's a saint, so he can't be wrong. Can't be wrong. We got this. Xavier, will you use the trash visible principle unity argument against Vatican II Catholics when Francis dies? And again, because, right, Xavier thinks there's no visible principle of unity because he's a schismatic. Of course there's a visible principle of unity because God made a promise to Peter that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So how can you not have someone with the keys, an actual person, because otherwise the gates of hell will prevail against the church? So again, schismatic nonsense from Xavier. More schismatic nonsense as usual. Now we have the Roman Catholic Church has diversity of contradictory beliefs. Eastern Catholics accept St. Palamas, rejects Filioque. We're truth-centered. Again, people can make errors in facts. You make errors in facts. You're truth-centered, but you have different jurisdictions teaching different things on birth control. You have different jurisdictions teaching different things on the ecumenical patriarch and ecclesiology. So don't give me that. Go fly a kite. Go fly a kite. All right, let's see. Economy is abused. We saw that. Not singing Orthodox hymns during Christmas. Yeah, I'm totally not going around singing Orthodox nativity hymns right now. I will say this. If I were better at singing, I would carol and I'd just sing the Western music. Because you got a captive audience that will listen to you say, in glory to God in the highest. Like, why wouldn't you do this? So I actually think Orthodox churches should organize evangelism teams and go out and carol. If you could sing, go do it. Or if you suck at singing, get friends that are good at singing and sing with them. There you go. So I think that's...
Nobody should suck at singing. If it was just normal, if communal singing was normal again, there wouldn't be this freaking out about like, oh, I'm a bad singer. It literally doesn't matter. You're like one voice in a whole choir, So you're going to be drowned out. But even then, as you keep going, you're going to naturally get better. You're not going to become like, I don't know, like like Ed Sheeran or whatever. But you'll be a decent singer, decent enough, and you can contribute to a choir. That's all you need.
I sing okay as long as someone else in the choir is correct tune, and I use them. So that being said, I recommend you read Keys Over the Christian World by John Calarafi and Scott Butler. Nice plug. Thank you, Xavier. It is a good book. I do recommend it as well. Unlike some other books written by monothelites. All right. So that being said, we have... Jesus Loves You. Calrafi is reason R&R, I believe. I don't know what that means. He said he is friends instead of against. Doesn't believe that Bergoglio is Catholic, but he could speak for himself, but he does attend a parish that's in communion with the Bishop of Rome. So there you go. That's all that's important in the end of the day. So let's see. People are saying Xavier, whether he's real. No, he's real. Xavier is real.
Yep.
A question for Catholic Craig. How do you reconcile Dengser 714 and Nostra Abbati number 3? I won't because I don't have them memorized. I couldn't tell you what those numbers are. So there you go.
There goes Roman infallibility.
People don't, like, literally today, it's fortuitous that today is Popesplaining. But literally today, I finished all my research into the papacy that pretty much I'm going to be doing. It took... You're always looking at this for years, but out of serious research, it took 6 years, and I've finished. I've read every primary source I could get my hands on that's relevant, every very large secondary source on these issues, and I finished with Constantinople 4, 879, 880, and I'm done. I'm not going past that.
Do you have a number of how many pages of notes you got?
I got a flash drive full of stuff, but it's... for my actual notes, it's actually not crazy. It's something like, I don't know, 40 or 60,000 words undistilled because direct quotations from the councils and stuff like that.
You just get to the meat of it. You don't really dilly-dally on like literature reviews and all that stuff.
Believe it or not, you don't need as many words as people think if you just take the sources at their word and don't explain everything away. Hence, Popesplaining. If God blesses me with continued life, because I could be dead tomorrow, who knows, I will write a book with these notes, and I don't think it'll be longer than 100,000 words. If it's 80,000, I'll be ecstatic, which means it'd be like a 225 page book. But the difference would be it will have more content than an 800-page book. And I'm not joking, because it actually cites more sources than these guys, more primary sources than these guys cite. I actually get into textual criticism of the primary sources. But because again, I don't have to invent they're saying things they're not saying, I don't need a lot of words. And that's the difference, I think, for the Orthodox side, Roman Catholic side. But that's me breaking script here. And I will take three more. Three more. If Pope true, why deny Christ? Because St. Peter was not the Pope yet. All right? And we've had popes commit apostasy, but that's different. Like, I forget his name. He was in the late 3rd century. But that doesn't mean that they'll teach heresy. They're only protected from teaching heresy, not from becoming heretics or falling away or going to hell. So,
Craig, super quickly, I think I've got to hit it to get on with my day, but this was super fun. Thanks for having me on.
That being said, Other Paul, before we lose you, because you know what, I'll call it quits there. Please give your plugs.
Yes, 100%. YouTube, The Other Paul. I think I'm in the description. I'm not in the description. How dare you?
I will add you. It's been a crazy day.
Legend, thank you. You can find me on YouTube, The Other Paul. I am literally less than 10 subs away from 2K subs. So people, like, subscribe, super epic. Come to my channel. Got good stuff in the works, including things with Craig. I'm working on his next coming big doco, The Errors of the Catholics, which is going to be a nice and very decisive over Romanism. But also got a stream interview on my channel with him on his theory about Anastasius the librarian, which he posted a big blog post about, basically arguing that we can actually pinpoint not only the day, not the day, but like the rough date, but also who more or less invented the papacy as we know it today. So that's going to be a very spicy, conspiracy-oriented stream, but nonetheless a true conspiracy, if Craig is correct.
Again, if everything other than direct jurisdiction, but if you could quote for the first time all these papal distinctives, and he's the guy saying all of them, and it's coming from his pen, I mean, then where else is it coming from?
I mean,
so,
yeah.
You know, so
pretty epic.
we'll be getting to that. We'll also get into the pseudo-Isidorian decretals, which very interestingly enough we actually have manuscripts from the 9th century. So this is like absurdly rare, but manuscripts from the 9th century that specify what library they're in when they were forging it. And they're in, I'm forgetting the name of the abbey at the top of my head, but Pascasinus Radbertus, or just Radbert, was the abbot of that monastery. And does anyone know what he's famous for? He invented the doctrine of Immaculate Conception. You can't make this stuff up. The pseudo-Isidorian decretals literally came out of the same monastery whose abbot was the guy who invented the Immaculate Conception. So it's mind-blowing stuff. So we'll be getting into that.
Epic. So yeah, sub to my channel for that. I'm now reorienting more towards pre-scripted video content like I originally was. So stuff that's more succinct, well edited, easy to watch for everybody, and not just for people with way too much spare time to watch a 3-hour mega stream. So get excited for that. Lots of good stuff happening. And Craig, thanks heaps for having me on.
Great having you on. I will do my plugs. You don't have to stay on for those if you don't want to.
I'll stay.
And get to work on my documentary.
Of course.
So I just want to put a nice little fan mail. Filaretto says, Craig, just want to thank you. Appreciate your thoroughness, the Immaculate Conception discussion Father Peter hears, and I appreciate your charity. Now, if this has blessed you, please bless Churches Cambodia, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Pray for the churches in Cambodia. Give $5, give $10, give $50, give $100. we need consistent support. We're having our first missionary that's not a priest, because we got Father Rome, Father Papacy that need their prayers. They'll be going there in March. Please pray for him. I won't give his name for sake of his anonymity. So we're having our first missionary there. So please support the church there. I would like to support full-time missionary work there, which is not going to be terribly expensive because you could get a job teaching English and be a missionary. So the point is, but we still need resources. And so we need consistent support. We raised the money to rebuild the cathedral in Phnom Penh. We would like to build not a cathedral, but a church in Siem Reap. So please support orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Give consistently, even if just $1 a month. We need consistent donors. This has blessed you. Please bless the churches in Cambodia. Also, please pray for me. Pray for the other Paul. Pray for my wife. She made a horrible mistake. I had gluten-free cookies that I was going to bring on Christmas to my family, and she forgot they were gluten-free, and my mother-in-law ate the cookies. I've got nothing to bring on Christmas, so pray for my wife that this cookie situation will be resolved as well, of course. So anyway, with all that being said, I will end the show saying I hope you had a lot of fun, give you a lot to think about with the issue of the papacy, and I'll end this show by saying, fight to the death for the truth. As Jesus Sirach says, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless
Amen.
you. Have a great day.
Catches.